Well, hello, welcome to church. Happy 4th of July. Thrilled to have you guys here with us. Very, very grateful that you guys are with us in church. If you came in and you didn't get a chance to grab notes, you raise your hand right now and we'll bring them out to you wherever you are. As they're handing those out, I want to say thank you to a special group of people. I know that we celebrate and we should, and every year it is impressive to me that God would be so gracious that we could take and send so many kids off to camp. But if you've never lived in a cabin for a week with 13-year-olds, you haven't lived. There are over 100 adults that go off with our kids, a lot of whom use their own vacation time to spend a week in a cabin with 13-year-olds. And they don't sleep much at night, and they are active during the day. They're there waiting when the conversation isn't about boys anymore or girls. And then they can say, hey, by the way, what's God doing in your life? And waiting for those moments is such a big deal. If you haven't thanked your camp counselor yet for your student or your kid, please do so, because it is a huge deal that they spend a week of their life every year off at camp. And we are very proud and grateful for our camp counselors. And that is a great lead. Yeah, you can go. You can clap for them. You should clap for them. You should buy them Starbucks is what you should do. We are working through the third week of our series in Not So Famous Dead People, looking how obscurity can actually be impact. And this week's story is about Jonathan. He embodied sacrifice. And so as we think about honestly, truly, and not just a joke, the sacrifice that over 100 of our adults gave to our campers last weekend, we're gonna look at how Jonathan's life embodies sacrifice. We can write this definition down of what sacrifice is. To be a camp counselor, giving up something of value for the sake of something of greater value. It's when you're willing to give up something of value for the sake of something of greater value. Now it's interesting because this definition of sacrifice is different than maybe what we would do aside from a biblical viewpoint. Apart from what Jonathan is going to teach us this weekend, apart from what God would call us to, in English we would say sacrifice is just the first part, right? Giving up something of value. And then the rest of this, if you give up something of value for the sake of something of greater value, in English we have another word for that. It's called investment. I'm willing to invest $10 knowing that later on I'll get 15 back. I'm willing to invest an hour at the gym knowing that, I'll leave behind fat and bring home muscle. I'm willing to invest, time and effort and energy into my marriage so that I have a stronger marriage. But in our world, sacrifice means I just give it up, and that's a loss to me. Investment is I'm willing to invest so that I can get something back in return. And the life of Jonathan is characterized by sacrifice. But I think this definition will make more sense, hopefully, if I do my job well. By the end of our time together, you'll see that what Jonathan did was biblical sacrifice, because God doesn't ever call you to empty yourself if he's not willing to fill it back up. So we're gonna do this. We're gonna walk you through 3 sacrifices that Jonathan clearly made. We're gonna walk you through some stories in which we find that. And at the end of our time together, we'll be done and you can return to the desert heat. Sound good? Good. Write this first one down. Jonathan was willing to sacrifice his status. The Bible spends a lot of time across the life of David. And looking at the life of David, the Bible devotes a lot of chapters to how Saul and David interact. Let me catch you up with a teeny refresher on biblical history. The people of Israel as a young nation wanted to have a king. And they said, God, everyone else has a king, we don't. And God said, well, you don't need a king. You don't have to be like the people groups around you. I'll lead you. You're good, but we'd love to also have a king. Well, but you don't need one. I'll lead you. We'd really like a king. Okay, if you have a king, they're gonna lead you in the way that they want, and they're gonna take your things for themselves, and you really want a king? We do. Okay, choose a king. And so they went out and they found someone who was tall and good looking, because that's how you elect a king, right? You go find someone who's tall and good looking. They obviously make good decisions. That's what I want to be. I would like to either be tall or good looking, one or the other, and Saul was both, okay? Saul becomes their first king. And Saul is excited because he was chosen, in much the same way we choose a homecoming king. That's how he was chosen to be a real king. And so he starts his tenure off, and shortly in the reign of Saul, one of their enemies, the Philistines, have this military champion, and one of the ways that they were going to settle battle is, hey, if someone from your army can beat someone from ours, we don't actually have to go to battle. We don't have to have loss of life. We don't have to do any of that. Let's just settle it with 1 against 1. And they send out Goliath. Now, I know that in our minds, in American Christian, church history, we know the story of David and Goliath. It makes for a great VeggieTales cartoon. But you've got to step into this story right now, because it initiates how we meet the character of Jonathan. David shows up, and Saul is not being a courageous king, he's being a guarded king. And even though he is tall, he's not going out to fight. And David shows up as a 13-year-old boy. And the Bible says he was young in his family and small in his family. He's from the house of Jesse. And he shows up and he's just indignant. He's so frustrated that no one is going out, because what Goliath has done is he's not couched himself, I'm better than your warriors. What Goliath has done, he's saying, our gods are stronger than your one God. And to David, that's a no-brainer. And he says, well, I'll go fight him. And everyone says, no, dude, you can't go fight him. And he says, yes, I can, because he's not made this about me versus him. He's made this about his gods versus my God. And to me, that's easy. And so I'll go. And Saul could have been provoked to a little bit of protective jealousy, right? He could have been provoked to a little bit of this altruistic, courageous response as a king. No, it's okay, 13-year-old boy. I'll go. You've moved me by your faith. But instead, Saul says, well, if you're gonna go, you should wear some armor. And so he offers his armor. Now, this is the end of the Bronze Age. It's kind of initiating the Iron Age. And so Saul offers probably a suit of bronze armor to a 13-year-old boy. This made a lot more sense to me one time when I was in a museum and I saw an excavated suit of bronze armor. And I'm a full-grown man, and I'm looking at this bronze-plated armor going, if I was wearing that, I wouldn't be able to move. I wouldn't be able to fight for sure. You probably couldn't kill me, because you could shoot an awful lot of arrows and whack a lot of sword before anything got through. But it made a lot of sense to me, standing in a museum looking at a suit of bronze armor, why David said to Saul, if I wear your armor, I won't be able to do a thing. And so David rejected the modern technology of his day. And so now, breathlessly, an army watches a young boy ignore technology and walk out onto the battlefield, and he's saying to himself, I'm gonna need some rocks or something. And he gets them, and so now we're watching a soldier shed his Kevlar, ignore, any sort of radar or satellite imagery, no intelligence gathered on this. He's not gonna go in with the 50 cal. He's just like, got a Glock or a 9, okay? And that's it. And now he's going to fight the insurgents. And all of a sudden, the army is breathless. And we know the story of David and Goliath. He prevails. And he comes back, and the end of chapter 17, 1 Samuel 17, begins the conversation to demonstrate to us that Saul is moved to such deep jealousy over David that it corrupts Saul's mind over the next few years. And that initiation of now David back at the tent with Saul after the battle with Goliath is how we now meet, we're introduced to Jonathan. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 1 is a contrast verse. And when it says to us, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him, and he didn't let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing, and he gave it to David, along with his tunic, even his sword, his bow, his belt. These gestures were symbolic. Jonathan was the son of the first king of Israel. That means he was in line for the throne. That means Jonathan was a prince. And now Jonathan is moved by what he saw on the battlefield. He is moved by the courageous faith of David, so much so that Jonathan's first instinct was this: wow, you should be a prince before I should be. You should be next in line before I should be. You should have everything royal that I've been given, because honestly, David, I kind of fell into this because my dad's tall. But after watching what you just did, I'm willing to say, you take my royal robe, you take my sword, you take my bow, you take my tunic, because what I see in you is special. What I see in you is different. What I see in you is more valuable than what I bring to the table. So what I can do for your good and for the glory of God is empty myself and step out of the way for who you are. Now, it's interesting because as we learn from the life of Jonathan, this story, there's not a lot of things that readily transfer from, 1000 BC, Mesopotamia to 21st century high desert American life. And so how do we say, okay, Jonathan, why doesn't your example be used by God in my life to mold me more into the image of what God wants for me? How can I sacrifice my status? We don't have kings. I'm not gonna be king of Apple Valley. That would be awesome. I want to be king of Apple Valley for a fortnight, But we don't have that. How can we transfer this lesson, this little segment of the story? Because in our culture, there are not a lot of things that we do to gain status. We've already embraced, we are not going to be famous, and that's all right. I don't even care. But what are the things that you and I still do to look for status in our culture? And it's real simple and straightforward. We love things. And it's either better earning power than the people next to us or the things that we get with better earning power. I'll tell you right now, I know the friends I have, and this isn't a criticism, this is an indictment of my own petty heart. I know the friends that have a bigger house than I have. I just do. I know the friends that have a better truck or car than I have. I know the friends that take better vacations than I do. I know the friends that, have nicer clothes for their kids than I do. And I don't ever think about all the friends that I have that, by the way, I'm able to dress my kids a little bit better than they, or that I've got more square footage than them, or that, our 9-year-old Toyota is nicer than theirs. Because even though it's funny to say, I do. I don't dwell on those things. I dwell on how can I gain more status? How can I gain more things? Jonathan is remarkable in his gut level instinct. Wow, what God is doing with your life is more important than the things I can hold on to in mine. And so my first reaction with you, David, is I'm gonna let go of the birthright I've got. I'm gonna let go of the status I've kind of stumbled into, and I'm gonna say, for your good and the glory of God, I'm gonna sacrifice my status. We struggle with that in our own walk. We think that God is out to get us, and we think that the church is all about this, and we think that everyone else is this and that, and they don't know the struggle and this. Listen, if God calls you to sacrifice something, it's good, period. And I know it's totally not fair that I got to learn that lesson as a 16-year-old kid in a bulletproof drive-through window at Taco Bell, that when God said, Tim, now that you've got earning power, I would like you to honor me with part of it on a regular basis, based on habit, based on conviction, based on faith, based on trust, not based on what you'll gain from it, Tim, but based on sacrifice. I'd like you to trust me with your income. And I don't know how to say it, guys. In my walk with God, there are areas where I struggle and there are areas where I don't. And as a 16-year-old teenage boy, I told God he could have access to my money, period. And I'm gonna say, years later, there's an awful lot of things I could have bought with the money I've sent away to churches and missions and kids at Compassion. There are things. But man, I'll tell you what, I don't think Jonathan regretted this day in his life. I just don't. Based on what I've read about his life, I don't think he thought, that was stupid. I shouldn't have been so generous with my friend. Oh, that was so dumb. David was a loser. I don't think he thought that. I think he looks back on that day and he thought, that changed the course of my adult life. It was, I don't even know why I did it, but all I saw was the favor of God in that life that I needed to invest in. I needed to give what I had to him. I just needed to do that. And I know that it changed where I wound up and what I had and who I became, but that initiates. So years go on. David is brought into the household of Saul, and I don't know how, the story of David is remarkable more than just the Goliath. The Goliath story is real pointed, it's such a sharp contrast, but the life of David is remarkable. He becomes a military genius, and it's this little small, not really guerrilla warfare, but it's this mix between the large armies and the guerrilla warfare, maybe that we be aware of today. He just led a band of men. It was David's mighty men, and it's almost folklore, it's almost legend, the sort of things that God did with his life. And as David became more prolific, Saul became more insane. People look back and they read what happened sequentially in the life of Saul, and they start to wonder, did Saul suffer from like bipolar or manic depression? Because he was starting to react in ways that were uncommon, unnatural, unnecessary because of who David was becoming. David was phenomenal. They had to chant, Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. Like, yeah, Saul's cool and we got a king, but holy cow, have you seen what David can do? Yeah, I'm sorry to say, I say this, hopefully, you guys know I'm not a Laker fan, but I say this, what if the new rookie that they drafted is fantastic? And what if the rookie they drafted last year that broke his leg is fantastic? And just these two young bucks start to run the court, and all of a sudden there's Kobe, coming down the court. And Kobe is the king of LA, and he likes being the king of LA. And what if all of a sudden the crowd starts to chant MVP, and it's not for Kobe? I'm telling you right now, that will mess with Kobe's head. It just will. Saul becomes a little bit crazy about David, and David starts to notice. And David's a military man. He's become incredibly effective at violent situations. And he starts to see that Saul wants him dead. And he starts to tell Jonathan, his best beloved friend, Jonathan, your dad is gonna kill me. And Jonathan's like, what? No way. He said it in a high voice like that too. He said, David, my dad is not gonna kill you. It's cool, man. You're like my brother. He brought you into our family. No, Jonathan, I'm not dumb about these things. Your dad wants to kill me. No. Jonathan, your dad wants to kill me. No, wait, David, I'll prove it to you. I'll put myself on the line in an awkward situation so that if he's angry to the point of murder, then he'll turn his anger on me. Okay? And David's like, well, what are we gonna do? We'll do this. There's this big feast he's gonna throw. It's gonna be important. Important people are gonna be there, and you don't show up for it. Okay? He'll notice that. And then when he says, wait a second, where's David? I'll step in and I'll say, it's cool. He and I got a plan and I gave him permission and he's not here. And then based on that event, I'll gauge whether or not he's gone crazy. And then David, I promise, will figure it out from there. And so now Jonathan chooses to put his security on the line, okay? You can write down this second thing that he's willing to sacrifice. Jonathan now is willing to sacrifice his security. Because David keeps trying to push the agenda, Jonathan says, no way, I'll step into a dangerous situation, so confident that it's not dangerous. But if for some crazy reason it is, David, let's set up a situation in which my life is on the line, not yours. We'll figure this out the most safe way I can think, and it's with me sacrificing, not with you. So we read in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 18, Jonathan said to David, tomorrow's the new moon feast. You're gonna be missed because your seat is gonna be empty. The day after tomorrow, towards the evening, go to the place where you hid when this trouble began. Wait by the stone Ezel. I'm gonna shoot 3 arrows off to the side of it, so make sure you're behind it, okay? As though I were shooting at a target. Then I will send a boy and say, go find the arrows. If I say to him, look, buddy, the arrows are on this side of you, bring them here, then you're safe. You can come back. But if I say to the boy, look, the arrows are beyond you, keep going, well, then you gotta go because the Lord has sent you away. And about the matter between you and I discussed, just remember that the Lord is witness between you and me forever. He's got the secret code, right? David is gonna be gone, hide in a field, and he's gonna shout to him, hey, the arrows are over here. Come on back, servant boy. It's cool. And that's gonna actually be words to David, letting him know, come on back, it's fine. But if my servant runs out to grab the arrows and I say, keep going, that's my signal to you that you gotta get out of here. It's fun, it's like spy stuff, right? Okay? So the feast happens, David is gone, Jonathan's there and he's watching and he's ready, and Saul notices. And Saul's a little ticked off, and you're about to see how ticked off Saul is by the fact that your pastor is gonna read something in church that you're like, oh, wow, that kind of got dicey. So Saul asks Jonathan, he's a little grumpy, okay? Where's David? Chapter 20, verse 28. Jonathan answered, David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, let me go. Our family's observing a sacrifice in my town. My brother's ordering me back there. He's so bossy. If I found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers. That's why he's not here. Do you see what Jonathan did? He put it on himself, didn't he? That's taking ownership. When you ask your kids, hey, who did this? And the first word out of their mouth is, well, my brother, like that's not taking ownership, right? When the first word out of their mouth is, well, what I did, I'm already proud. I'm already proud. It's like they're don't tell them this, but they're magically already not in trouble based on how proud I am of the fact that they took ownership and responsibility, right? Jonathan's first words out of his mouth, David came to me and asked me permission. And I said, you know what? It's cool. It's on me, Dad. That is courageous. Verse 30, Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan and said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman. I don't know if she's at the feast, but I tell you what, it's an awkward family dinner right now, okay? You son of a perverse and rebellious woman. Don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? You know, this is going so poorly. And now look at what Saul's doing. He's saying, you've sided with that guy. You've betrayed me. You and your mom and David are all out to get me. You're conspiring against me. Why cannot Saul see that when God is blessing David, it is for the good of the kingdom that Saul runs? He can't. It's about Saul. Saul is the antithesis of Jonathan. Saul is self-absorption, self-awareness, self-preservation. Jonathan is about sacrifice. And his security now is on the line. David told him, Jonathan said, no way, but let's figure out a situation in which my safety is on the line and not yours, because I'll do something about it then. I'm willing to sacrifice myself for it. Verse 31, as long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, that's David, the son of Jesse. As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die. Saul says, don't you get it, Jonathan? If he keeps doing well, you won't be king. My name will not go down in history because my line will be cut off. You stupid fool. Why in the world would you protect David? He is your enemy. And Jonathan instinctively just says back to his dad in verse 32, why would he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father. Steps in the gap again. It's just natural for Jonathan. It's just natural. Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. Oh, and then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. No duh, the Bible. You throw a spear at me, I will figure it out too. Sometimes it feels like shy of that, I don't get it. So Jonathan is willing to sacrifice his security, isn't he? I mean, the depth of the character of this guy. He's not the famous guy, is he? He's not the VeggieTale episode, is he? He's not the one that, the line of Jesus is brought through, is he? He's not. He don't care. He's willing to sacrifice for the good of others and the glory of God. And he's confused by all this. This is such a low point for him because he remembers when his heart was thumping out on the battlefield and he watched this kid shun the technology of the day and advance for the glory of God. And he just knew, he's like, that's the sort of life I need to invest in. That's the sort of person I need to make, I'm gonna invest in them. And I'm gonna say something right now that requires maturity, and I'm gonna try and be very careful in how I say it. I'm gonna say ahead of time and after time what I don't mean, okay? I do not mean based on what I'm about to say, that if you are in a relationship that is physically dangerous, that you need to just suck it up. I do not think that at all. I think if you're in a relationship that is physically dangerous, you can get help. You should get help. You should call us. You should call someone that you trust that's gonna give you good, sound advice. You should be protected physically. Most of us, though, are not in relationships where spears are literally thrown at us. Most of us are in relationships where they're metaphorical spears, right? Most of us are in relationships that are difficult for reasons different than death, okay? And most of us in those relationships, we decide that the other person is the enemy. And in a lot of cases, we turn our marriage into a win or lose proposition, where I need to protect myself from my spouse because over the years we've gotten tired and we've lost our filter and we don't, we're not selfless and we're not careful and we're not loving and we're not, sacrificing on behalf of our spouse, and we turn our husband or our wife into someone to win. And so we use nitpicking or volume or circumstances, and we try and navigate our marriage by winning. You should not do that. You should not. And I understand that if you're in a difficult spot in your marriage, I know that it requires sacrifice. I know that. And let me say again, if you are in a marriage that is physically dangerous, you should and you can get help. I am not advocating that at all, okay? Matter of fact, I'd love to get grumpy and, be a typical dude and, get all aggressive in my speech about physical abuse in relationships. That's not proper. I don't think that's the right way to handle it. I think the right way to handle it is to call for help, and I think you should. But a lot of us are just in difficult situations, aren't we? Just difficult. And we turn it into a situation to win. And you turn your kids into an object that you want to win. If they would just shut up and listen to me. If my spouse would just shut up and listen to me. If they would just agree. I think that of a lot of people, pretty much everyone. I just wish that everyone would always drive the speed I thought was appropriate for that section of the freeway. I wish that everyone would shop in the same direction I shop at the grocery store. I wish that everyone would have the same schedule I tend to like. And it's just not that way. And it's easy over the years to have those important people in your life. Well, it's easy to turn them into the enemy. And then all of a sudden the example of Jonathan is, you know what, David, for your sake, I'm willing to sacrifice my security. I'm willing to say, it's gonna cost me something. It will. It will cost you something to have a wonderful marriage for 50 years. It just will. The person you married has issues. And you've got issues. And so it's gonna take that. Your kids, they're not perfect. I checked on the Facebook page, they're not. And it's gonna cost. And I don't say that out of a sense of arrogance that I'm continually laying my life on the line. I'm saying, how can I read the scriptures and have remarkable characters make impressions on my life that call my life to a degree of faithfulness that changes the world around me? I'm not gonna have fame and I don't even care, but what I have a shot at is impact. And so Jonathan, holy cow, I meet you, instinct. I'm gonna prioritize David. I'm gonna invest in him. My status, gone. I don't even care. Next thing I do, security, gone. I don't even care. At my expense, for your good, for his glory, I'm gonna keep advancing the story. And so now Jonathan's pretty convinced. The spear in the wall did it. And so now he's got to follow through. And he goes to bed that night, head spinning. Wait a second, God, what is going on? I step into this role of prince, and that's great, but all of a sudden you bring someone into my life that is obviously blessed by you that I need to invest in, and God, I have. And now my dad is the one who wants to kill your anointed. What? And he goes to bed that night knowing that the next evening he's got to go out to a field and follow through on what he promised. And so that's what he sacrifices next, and it's his stability. Jonathan, at this point in the story, is now willing to sacrifice his stability. Chapter 20, still in the book of 1 Samuel, verse 35. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for his meeting with David. He had a small boy with him. He said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows I shoot." And as the boy ran, he shot an arrow past him, which is better than at him. And when the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out after him, "Isn't the arrow beyond you?" Then he shouted, "Hurry, go quickly, don't stop." Then he's shouting directions to his friend, He's shouting directions to his brother, David. And he's now following through on his promise. Why am I shocked? Why am I surprised? That when Jonathan wakes up in the morning, if he follows through on what he's promised, that means the one good thing in his life, he's saying, get out of here. It's better for you to be gone. I'll go home to my crazy dad. I'll go home to my empty position as prince, knowing it's going to go nowhere. I'll go home to probably the continued military direction of a man who's losing his mind. And without your expertise navigating battles, I'm probably going back to my death. Jonathan's not stupid. Even though he's selfless, it doesn't mean stupid. And in our culture, we tend to think the Forrest Gumps of this world, you got to be a little slow to be selfless. You've got to be a little bit, a few eggs short of a dozen for you to be selfless in our culture. Jonathan is sharp. He knows what he's doing. And so verse 39, the boy knew nothing about all this, only Jonathan and David knew. Verse 40, then Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said, "Get out of here, go back to town." And after the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone, and he bowed down before Jonathan 3 times. With his face to the ground, they kissed each other and they wept together, but David wept the most. David's been invested in for years by a fellow named Jonathan. And Jonathan's never going to be famous, and he's not going to have the line of the Messiah. He's not going to have the VeggieTales, and David is moved by him. And he understands what this means. And so he bows and he weeps. In verse 42, Jonathan follows through. What a stud. "Go in peace, for we've sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, between your descendants and my descendants forever.' Then David left, and Jonathan went back to town." It's instinct. He just does what's right. He just does for the good of others and the glory of God. Jonathan says, "I made you a promise. And if it wasn't safe and good for you to be here, I was going to tell you need to go. David, you need to go. I'll go back to the palace. I'll go back to Saul. You should go. It's better." And David knows what it means, and he's leaving and crying. And the Bible just says that Jonathan did what was right. And his willingness to sacrifice his stability, I know our culture freaks out about money. Do you see what a small thing it was for him to prioritize the status in the beginning? You see how things got more important, right? Your life is so much more important than your wages. And now he steps in and he kind of puts his life on the line at a banquet. And he's like, whoa, okay. Well, you know what? As soon as I begin to sacrifice my security, and when I'm not the chief principal in the story, all of a sudden it's easy for me to follow all the way through. I'm following all the way through, David. You are the last good thing in my life, and you need to get out of here. And I am absolutely content to put it all on my shoulders, to weather the storm myself. And when Jesus walked the earth, he said a bunch of phrases that didn't make sense at the time when he said it. We have the luxury of 2,000 years of church history, good orthodox teaching, theology on our side to understand what he meant when he said these things. But as a teacher is walking around and he says these statements, how much do they make sense in the moment? Unless a seed falls in the ground and dies, it can never produce fruit. Well, no duh, we live in an agrarian society. We all know that you gotta plant a seed, it cracks open and then a plant comes. What do you mean, unless a seed falls in the ground and dies? No doi, that's Hebrew for no duh, okay? Jesus made statements like, hey, if you don't admit you're blind, you'll never be able to see. And he made that statement to people who could see. And they're thinking, what? What do you mean, unless I admit I'm blind, I can't see? I can see. What are you talking about? And then he made bigger statements, didn't he? Unless you admit that you're dead, you're gonna die a second time. Woo, what? Ha, if someone was in the fact admitting that they were dead, wouldn't that just by the laws of nature mean and prove that they were not yet in fact dead? What? Jesus made a lot of statements to clarify something that is exemplified in the sacrifice of Jonathan. Hey, unless you give God your life, you don't have life. Unless you give God your blindness, there are all sorts of things you don't see. Unless you give God your heart, it's not beating at all. That's the viewpoint of Christianity. For 2,000 years, God has spoken into a world that is spiritually dead, and he's been really good when he said, if you can acknowledge your death, I will give you life. Just acknowledge it to me, and I step in. Jonathan was there, man. He was so there. He's just like, man, I know that it's gonna cost me myself. But when I'm willing to put myself back on the back burner, look what happens. Look at how David now flees and he's preserved. As a matter of fact, there's this one other meeting between this and the death of Jonathan. Jonathan bumps into David on this battlefield. And after this, Saul goes full hunt for Red October, okay? He is now, it's not just casually thinking about killing David, it is a military mission. We're gonna hunt and kill David. And Jonathan winds up on a battlefield with him, and he just says to David, you're gonna be fine. God has got you. You are being protected by the will and the strength of God. It's just who Jonathan is. And can you imagine being that person for somebody? You're not gonna ever make it on the internet for a good or hopefully a bad reason. You're not gonna wind up in the paper. No one's gonna make a VeggieTale video about you either. No problem. Can you imagine being that for somebody in this world? That every time you interact with them, that you'll be remembered as the individual that made your wife great. You're the individual that made your kids faithful. That's the sort of stuff that gets your heart pumping, right? And unfortunately, we got to step into what the Bible would call us to a life of significance for that. Because everything in my life, I want to be significant because I'm tall and good looking. I want to be significant because I'm rich, because everyone thinks I'm smart, because I do some amazing feat that everyone remembers me by. But I tell you what I can do in the life of the people that are my world, my oikos, I can sacrifice. And that's where it's hard and stuff. That's where the struggle is. And so these are the takeaways from the life of Jonathan. One, stop fighting God. Just don't fight him on the circumstances. Just do this. Be willing to say, God, I'm not gonna fight you right now. Have you ever taught a 4-year-old how to swim? You don't teach a 4-year-old to swim the first lesson. You teach a 4-year-old to not fight you in the pool. That's what you teach, okay? The amount of claw marks on your neck, shoulders, and arms. What did you do, fight a drunk cat? What's going on? No, I was teaching my 4-year-old to swim. Oh, I'll pray for you. Because once you teach them to stop fighting, then you can teach them to start swimming, huh? Second thing, do this. Just pray for wisdom. Just ask God. If you're I do not trust any church that I'm gonna give, okay, then start asking God. God, I don't trust anyone to give. Okay, he already knows. God, I'll tell you right now, I don't wanna yield my sexuality to you and how I express it. I wanna use it the way I wanna use it. but maybe if I sacrificed that, maybe it'd be better and stuff. I don't know, whatever. God, that's not where I am right now. Tell God, I don't want to be selfless and sacrificial in my marriage because God, if I don't control my spouse, they're going to be out of control. And so I'm going to keep manipulating. Just tell God that. And then can you do this? Can you add a comma? But God, maybe there's a better way to handle my finances or my sexuality or my marriage. Maybe there's a better way. And so can you introduce me to it? And then after there is intellectual and emotional responsibility, then now move towards the opportunity. I think we should walk through our Christian walk with healthy heads and healthy hearts. I really do. But I think that the Christian walk sometimes is going to call us to something sacrificial. I just do. I do not know what it is for you. And I've used examples to try and contextualize, because I don't think someone's going to throw a spear at you. I don't think you're going to go out into a field and shoot arrows. If you do, please don't shoot the boy, shoot past the boy. But the bottom line is this, is that I can learn from Jonathan's sacrifice. I can. And God can use all of us to impact the world around us. Let's pray. Father, we pray that you would use our lives to impact the world around us. And God, I want it to be through all the winsome, amazing things that I want to be true in my life. And I acknowledge, at least this weekend, that in my head, I'm going to put this in, the story of Jonathan. And he changed the world by being sacrificial. He changed the world by leaning away from being famous. He changed the world by investing in the good of others and the glory of your name. So Father, help us to stop fighting you, and then God, help us to be mature and grown up and start praying about the things in our life that we're being possessive of. And then God, after we've done those things, move us as a people of faith, a people who are intellectually and emotionally mature, and God, move us towards decisions that advance your kingdom. God, we're bred in a culture that wants to advance our name. So help us, maybe through sacrifice, to advance yours. We pray these things because we just believe you're better. We believe that you're stronger. We believe that you're wiser. So now give us the courage to follow in faith. Amen.